class. I'm very glad to be back and to be talking to you. Um, okay, let's go on with this awesome section on Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. If you didn't read my notes about Socrates and Plato, please read them because I have real questions there for you about Plato's Republic, the idea of philosopher kings, which you may have heard about, and the guardians, etc. And the real question, as I ended my notes with, was who is going to guard the guardians? Um, you could see that that could be a problem if you had a dictator and he is not benign or benevolent. Who's going to rule or govern him? Um, okay, excuse me. Um, in your book, right here, when it's discussing the art of the time, let's take a little deviation before I get back to Plato and Socrates. Um, you will see a very beautiful sculpture of the female body, which is unusual, as you know, for ancient Greek times. It's done by the sculptor Praxiteles, although it is still in that naturalistic form that we see a lot of during this time in the arts. Okay, that's all I wanted to point out to you. They're very beautiful. You can see them in your book. Okay, let's talk about Plato's most famous student, Aristotle. Aristotle lived in 384 to 322, so about 60 years. He was the son of a doctor, and because of that, you could say that he became concerned or interested in looking at real life, at natural phenomenon. Um, and that's why we call Aristotle the father of social science or empirical science. In other words, what real life is like in the world surrounding him. So he was interested not in, lofty ideas, sort of like Plato, but really like what is making the plants grow? Why did disease infect that body? So Aristotle's philosophical system then had to do with analysis of the real world around him, the empirical world. That's all empirical means, meaning the world around him. Sensory experiences. So everything we see and touch for Aristotle is important. And that's the way in which he learns. That's the philosophy in which he learns. Whereas Plato and Socrates seem to be interested in abstract reasoning, Aristotle seems to be interested in testing, observation, looking at the real world around him. Um, he also established something called a syllogism, which you may have heard of or may not. It's big in philosophy. A syllogism is a kind of reasoning in which one premise leads to a conclusion. So, for example, if you watch this mud, a seed in this mud, a tree will grow. It's something that's obviously true based on what is. Um, and for Aristotle, the highest good in a community or in life is that the community exists in a harmonious and scientific way together. It The greatest good consists of the functioning of the body and the mind together. So you could even say that all these sort of body movements, self help movements today that use herbs and oils and things like that have and body mind movement have their origins in the respect Aristotle had for the mind and abstract thinking, and also for the body and the ways in which the earth and surrounding area influence the body. So this is his whole thing, is harmony between the body and the mind. He believed, of course, that humans are different from animals. Why? Because they could argue, they could find happiness exercising their brains. They could act they could control their instincts, unlike animals who just go for the kill. We can control our natural instincts and our temperament. We don't have to indulge in them. We can act moderately, use our brains, and we don't have to have excessive brainiac power or too little. We can find a middle road. So Aristotle thought of politics instead of sort of a mechanism of, leaders, not leaders, a bureaucracy. Aristotle thought of politics as that thing which makes you moderate and can create not only harmony between the body and the mind, but within the community. He took it for granted, like your book says, that some people are going to be barbarians. They're not going to be fully human. Why? Not because they didn't have the capacity, but because they lived outside of a social community, outside of a nation. So when Aristotle says man is by nature a political animal, that means that it's natural for him to live within society, to be able to live a tempered life of checks and balances. And so the best life, politics as the best life, would be a life in which men and women, or men in particular, could realize their full potential. If you were to study in the, Western Civ Part 2, you would see that the Enlightenment philosophers really take off on this idea, Rousseau, that society should make men better. It's not controlling original sin, it's making them better. Okay, before I go on to the story of Alexander the Great and his accomplishments, which I'm not going to go into every battle because we don't have time, but your next section in this book talks about the ways in which other intellectuals at this time, instead of sort of increasingly religious movements in Hellenic society, they were considering different kinds of ideas, different realities. For example, because there were lots of different ideas floating around the Greek area at this time. For example, Xenophon, who you might remember as one of the soldiers in the 10,000 March in Iran. He was a product of the Socratic tradition and a contemporary of Plato. And after his being on the 10,000 March in Persia, he went to fight as a mercenary for the Spartan king. And he became his friend. He was disillusioned by how Athenian democracy failed. So he went into the Spartiate system, to the system in Sparta, which was much more rigid and much more predictable, if you will. And he observed the work of Epaminondas, the military warrior.
Unknown caller.
Excuse me. I didn't turn that off. Sorry about that. He didn't like the work of Xenophon, and interestingly enough, as your book says, he didn't even mention him in the history of Sparta. He loved horses and dogs. He wrote a treatise on how to hunt them humanely. So Xenophon, you're not going to look at him too deeply, but the other Athenian orator that became popular from 436 to 338, as your book says, is Isocrates. And he was convinced that the reason Athens failed was something had gone terribly wrong with the Peloponnesian War. And he didn't imagine that there could be any solution other than a strong leader, somebody who had a vision and ability, and somebody that could unite all the Greek pole. In other words, unites Sparta and Athens. He believed that's really why the the country died. And so he began to think of the strong man or the great leader for the job, which brings us to Alexander the Great's father. Now, his father was named Philip II. He's from, if you look at your map, Macedonia, which is north of the Greek Isles. It's on the mainland. It had always been on the, in the Hellenic universe. But now that Athens was no longer a great power, Philip II, I believe I talked about this before, who had spent his youth in Thebes, in the Greek city of Thebes, as a hostage, had learned from Greek society and learned Greek philosophy, watched Greek drama, he learned how to fight. And when he got back to Macedonia, decided to coordinate this knowledge with his own Macedonian people. He learned about the phalanx, he learned about all of that. And what he tried to do was access through the weakness of Greece to take advantage of Athens and Sparta's weakness to get to Persia in order to get to the wealth of, southern and western Persia, and of course silver, etc. Philip was also extremely ambitious. He not only wanted to conquer and then forcefully reunite unit, but he wanted to extend his powers and to see that, but interestingly, are going to be fulfilled, those dreams, by his son. Okay, so let me take a break here. I'll come back and talk about Alexander the Great and why he's great, and then then we'll end again.